Welcome to Effective Bible Teaching Session number 6. In this session we will look in more depth at the lesson activities, constructing them and what they should be. As you recall, with the bridge, we gapped the distance between what we know about how people learn and what actually happens in the classroom. And we cross this bridge with our lesson plan, which is made up of our goals, activities, and our tests. So we've already talked about the goal or the goal indicator statements, and that of course was the first pillar. And now we'll move on to talk about the learning activities. Your text identifies 3 different categories: the cognitive methods, which would be those methods that we would use to help teach for knowledge and understanding. We also talked about the saw in the text, affective methods, which teach for affective change. Behavioral methods, which teach for a change in behavior, and then we would add to that the psychomotor methods, which would teach for some kind of psychomotor skill, where you're teaching a physical skill like playing an instrument or playing a sport, that kind of thing. We also saw that the structure by which we will organize these activities will be the hook, book, look, took, and those are related to specific activities or specific functions that we want to accomplish, and we'll look more in depth at that. We've already looked at that some, but we'll do even more in-depth look at that. And there's another way of structuring these activities which you may be familiar with, and it's the motivation, examination, and application, where motivation is where you use the activity to motivate learners to learn. Then examination is where you're looking at the material, and application is how they apply that material to their life. And so if you want to use that same kind of structure, you can do it by knowing that the hook is really the motivation part, that the book and the look are the ways that we do the examination. So the book is the looking at it initially, understanding the concept, and the look is taking a deeper look and getting more familiar with it by doing worksheets and the kind of things to practice what you've learned there. And then the application is the took, or what you take out of the classroom, and how this applies to life. So we'll look at it in both of these ways as we move on this session. But before we talk about more of the structure, I want to show you a process by which we select the proper learning activities. And it starts with, first off, knowing your learning goal or your learning aim. Now, when you know what it is you're trying to accomplish, that learning goal, in this case we use the goal indicator statements, that goal indicator statement will help you to narrow down and focus on one primary learning outcome. Or if you've got more than one learning aim, then you'll have more than one primary learning outcome. So it's either going to be knowledge, understanding, attitude, or behavior, or skill. And it could be understanding at some level of understanding. It could be comprehension, application, synthesis. We'll talk more about that later. It could be at some level of attitude, just receiving, responding, valuing, characterizing, etc. So whatever that primary learning outcome is, though, that will determine the principles of learning that you will employ. There are specific principles that help in learning at one of those levels, or in one of those outcomes, primary learning outcomes. So there are some principles that are known to help with the gain in knowledge. There are some principles that are known to help in the gain in understanding, principles to help in the gain of attitude and skill. So we're going to look at those principles. In fact, those principles are in a sheet that I uploaded on the site for this lesson, and it's the principles of teaching learning. So we're going to look at those in a little bit. And once we know the principles, we can then choose the learning activities associated, reflected in those principles. And there's another sheet that I uploaded, which is called, it's titled Match the Activity with the Goal. It's the learning activities. And so this is just a sample of learning activities. We'll look at those in a minute. But those are the kind of activities that you might learn that are undergirded by specific principles that we know to be true. And then those learning activities, once they're accomplished, should lead us to the learning goal that we started with. And by the way, these goals should be the same. Whatever I end up in the class should be the learning goal or aim that I started with, that I was trying to accomplish. But I arrive at that by making sure I choose the right learning activities that are based upon the right principles of learning, which is based upon the specific primary learning outcome that I'm trying to accomplish. And the way I can test that these two learning goals are congruent is, of course, through a test, which is what we do at the very end. It's our test. It's the way to make sure that these things, that the goal is actually accomplished. Well, let's take a look at before we look at a sample, I do want to show you those two sheets, and we're going to go through those briefly. So I did upload these two sheets, the Principles of Teaching and Learning, and also the one that's the Learning Activities sheet that will look something like this. So I'd like to go to those sheets right now and then take a look at, just kind of work through these a little bit so you kind of see what these are trying to accomplish here. So we know that learners tend to gain knowledge and information more efficiently when, and these are a sample of some of the kinds of principles that we know are true about learning and knowledge. When they see in advance the total organizational pattern of the information, we call those advanced organizers. So if they see in advance what they're going to learn, they see in advance the organization of the information, then when you go to teach it, they better remember it because they've seen it in advance. That's a really great principle. When they respond in an active way, when they use numerous and varied activities in regard to information. So it's a variety of information a variety of methods that they can use. When they use space practice, that's meaning they practice, rest, practice, rest. So if they're trying to memorize something and gain knowledge in something, if they do a space practice, so they practice it, then they rest a little bit, do something else, come back, practice it, then rest. That is a principle that helps them learn the knowledge. When they know the results of the response immediately. So as soon as they know, immediately, yes, no, that's right or wrong, then, and they get a feedback, well, then they learn better that way. They use more than one sense at a time when they confront the information in a novel, interesting way. That's for knowledge. Now, understanding, there are some principles for understanding. When they get information about a concept or process, they have to gain information about it, get more information, they tend to understand it better. When they translate an idea into a new form or recognize a translation, that shows a level of understanding. By the way, this particular principle is one that you did when you translated the definition of learning, that learning is a change in knowledge, understanding, skill, attitude and skill brought about by experience. Well, you translated that principle or that definition, and this is the principle here, translating into a new form. When they identify terms related to a concept and learn their meaning, so it's this idea of related concepts and terms. So there's a whole bunch of wonderful things here. And by the way, as we move down these are getting into higher and higher levels of understanding. And if you remember some of the levels that we talked about before, evaluation, for instance, when they assess the relative value, or synthesis, when they produce a new unique product and put the parts together, or analysis, when they analyze a concept or process by discovering its parts. So each of these can reflect more than one level of understanding. Then we go into attitude. You know, learners tend to experience some change in attitude when these things happen, when they observe a leader who sets the example and exemplifies the attitude, when they read or hear about persons who exemplify the attitude, when they become aware of and focus attention on a particular subject, when they identify and specify the attitude, when they learn what the attitude means. So all of these things are ways that attitude is gained when you teach. So if they can face meaningful emotional experiences related to the attitude, that is a way that learners can begin to have a change in attitude. So these principles are really good, and this, of course, is only a small sample of the kinds of principles that we would use. And the second page has to do with skill, developing a psychomotor skill. When they see in advance the total organization of the process or product, that's the advanced organizer. When they see it demonstrated, when they follow step by step, they perform it step by step. When they receive guidance from their first attempts, when they perform the activity repeatedly with little or no guidance, and when they practice under conditions which approximate reality, which would be they practice in a synthetic environment, but it's one that like a simulation or a simulator environment. Well, these are principles that we will use and talk about as we design our lesson plans. But these principles underlie the actual activities. We're not going to just tell the student, I want you to respond in an active way. We are going to create activities that require the student to respond in an active way when we're trying to teach them for instance, knowledge. So the activities will be built based upon these specific principles. Okay, and so let's go to that second sheet, the matching learning activities. We've listed here underneath knowledge, understanding, attitude, and skill. We've listed some just a sample of the kinds of activities that you could use. For instance, listening guides and lecture and field trips. These are ways that you could begin to use to bring activities you could use for knowledge. And you'll see that these kinds of activities, underneath them are one or more principles that we just saw. Okay, so for instance, if I look at puzzles, okay, by putting together puzzle or by working with puzzles. So what principle would underlie puzzles? Well, confronting the information in a novel way. Putting together the puzzle is kind of fun. It's novel. It's a little unique. That's kind of cool. Maybe if you have an immediate knowledge of results, if you know the results right away, you do or don't get the puzzle. Well, that's one way that a puzzle can give you that. And it's also it's an active way. If you're actively trying to solve a puzzle, then it's an active way. You're just not sitting down and listening. You're actually actively involved in solving the puzzle. Those are just a couple of ways that a puzzle might, some of the principles behind using a puzzle, for instance. And you can go through each of these. There are many. Drama is kind of here across the board, and it really depends upon how you use a drama. I would give an example, like if you just wanted to, you could use drama for quite a strong emotional appeal to demonstrate an attitude that must be adopted or taken on. A drama could be very strong for that, but could also be a way just to simply help somebody understand something. And so drama and by the way, it's very immersive. It's very uses all the senses. So and also drama can be used not just for the performance, like for the person seeing the drama, but usually in an educational setting, the best part about drama is being involved in it. It's your participation in the drama that makes it so powerful. So these are ones that we encourage you to use for your teaching lessons as you develop them for this class, and use them outside the class. And again, this is just a small sampling of the kinds of activities that can be used in your teaching times. Okay, so now let's return back to the PowerPoint, and I want to now move into this. Go back to this model and look at an example. Okay, and the example. Let's just say we'll start here. The learner will demonstrate knowledge of the names of the books of the minor prophets. Okay, that's the goal, and the indicator state would be something like, of course, by listing them or naming them from memory without any mistakes, or whatever that indicator might be. But we're focused right now on the goal here. Okay, and by the way, the minor prophets are these 12: Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. And you probably already know these and memorized these at some point. So how would we help our learner memorize these in our lesson plan? That is the goal. So we know that the primary learning outcome is knowledge. Yes? Knowledge. We want them to demonstrate knowledge. Okay? And by the way, that indicator must indicate the attainment of knowledge, not understanding. We don't care if they understand what the book is about. We don't care if they understand the conditions under which it was written. We only want them to demonstrate knowledge at this point, and that means they just have to know what the books are. And we don't even maybe care if they know how to spell the books, as long as they can recite them from memory. Okay? And it may be that you do want them to know the names and the spellings, and so in that case they would have to spell them out either on paper or spell it out, Amos, A-M-O-S. But whatever that your goal is, it needs to be reflected by that indicator. Okay, so now we know that it's knowledge, and so we go to the learning principles that we know that help promote knowledge and gaining knowledge. So learners tend to gain knowledge, and there was 2 of them on that list that we just saw: when they respond in an active way, or when they space practice. We talked about both of those. So let's just take those are just examples of a couple principles that we can use. Now, based on those principles of responding in an active way and space practicing, what could be some things that we can do? What are some possible learning activities? Well, doing a Bible search. So they have to go through and search through the Bible to find those specific names, those minor prophets. Well, that's active. They're responding in an active way. They're opening the Bible. They're getting in there. They're flipping through. They're going to the table of contents. They're finding them in their book, and they're actively searching. That would be a very great way to begin to understand and know not just the names, but also the locations of where those minor prophets are. Another way to do that would be maybe doing a mini drama where each person takes one of those names and they introduce themselves. Hi, I'm Hosea. Hi, I'm Joel. Hi, I'm Amos. And each of those people now are associated somehow with the name, and that's a better way. It's a memorization technique where you've got, little Bobby is actually Jonah, and everybody remembers, oh, Bobby is Jonah, and you got swallowed by a whale. So now they can remember those, and you can even put those people in the right order up in front of, and so everyone can sort those people around, maybe with this little mini drama here where they're actually the people, the representing the prophet, and then they're organized in that right way, and they can say their name, and that's one way to help memorize the order and the names of the minor prophets. When they recite repeatedly, that's an active, and that's also one of these learning activities that was on the learning activity list of reciting repeat. In fact, if we go back to that real quick, I'll show you where I'm getting that. Again, it's right here. If they recite repeatedly, right here. And so this reciting repeatedly is one of those learning activities, along with the other one I had on there was a memory song. So a memory song and reciting repeatedly are ways that you can do this space practice. You could sing the song, you can learn the song, and you can sing it over and over. Then you take a break, do something else, come back, and do the memory song again. Or you could recite it repeatedly, and then come back and take a break, and then do something else, and have your, graham crackers and milk, and then come back and then be able to recite it again. So these could represent or be represented by these learning principles when they space practice here. So we would create a curriculum and a lesson plan that would take into account a series of learning activities based on these principles that would then bring us closer to this goal. And of course that goal would have to be tested and to make sure that it matches what we were trying to accomplish here. So of course in this case we would have the students one at a time stand up and repeat the names of the books of the minor prophets. Okay, does that make sense? So and this is important because we cannot create the right learning activities unless we know the principles related, the underlying principles that we know will help us in a gain in knowledge or whatever that primary learning outcome. So if this were an attitude, a goal for attitude, for instance, we would need to make sure that we had the right learning principles for attitude and then base our learning activities on those principles. And then we could then incorporate those into our learning time to accomplish our attitude goal in that case, and then we would test it. Now the testing is not quite as easy because again we have to allow that to be tested outside of the class in a voluntary setting. We'll talk a little more about that later on. Okay, so now let's go on and talk specifically about, I did want to mention one thing. These yellow circles represent the only 2 things that are actually done during the teaching time. We don't do the goal indicator statement. We don't do these learning. What we do, these learning activities are accomplished during the learning time, as is the test. So this is simply a way for us to arrive at what the learning activities may be, and these two things are the only things that happen or that appear on the lesson plan. Okay. All right. So let's move ahead. And you remember this this little diagram here of going around the circle, and this is how we will proceed. We begin with the hook. That's the first learning activity that we do in the classroom. Okay, and that's, again, the hook is for this first quadrant right here, those that are the feeler watchers. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Now this is also the motivation, right? We talked about the motivation, examination, application. Well, motivation is the hook, and this is for the feeler watchers. And if you read the article, and I hope you did read the article, Creating an Unforgettable Learning Experience, it's best to have read that before watching this video. So if you haven't done that, pause now and go read that article, Creating an Unforgettable Learning Experience. It comes out of the Teaching Ministry of the Church book. So if you've read that, you know that Bernice McCarthy, in her format model, which is exactly what we're seeing here, just a little different words, calls the feeler watcher the imaginative learner. The imaginative learner. And so the imaginative learner asks this question: why learn this? Why learn this? And you have to answer the question why for them. And the way you do that is you give them the reason by creating a concrete experience, some kind of experience to kick things off and to get them motivated to go, wow, this is interesting, I want to learn more. Okay, so some guidelines. Now your text gives you some guidelines in this, and it's in one of your chapters. I think it's in the chapter talks about the hook book took on the 4 elements of your lesson, and underneath hook, page 155, it talks about these 4 items here. You need the hook activity needs to get the attention of your learners. It needs to surface a need that you will a need of your learners, so it connects to them, relates to them based on their needs, right? It sets a goal, a direction for the lesson, and it leads naturally into the topic of the lesson. So those are the things that they recommend that this does. In addition to that, I want to suggest that you should make that experience as sensory as possible. Use as many of the 5 senses as you can. Don't just let it be something they see, but let it be something they see, hear, feel, taste, and touch. That's more powerful. And also make the experience emotional. Now, I'm not saying to make it unduly, unnecessarily, or manipulatively emotional. I'm just saying the more sensory you make it, and the more emotional you make it appropriately, you're going to tap into the built-in motivations of the learner, and they're going to want to learn. And then also make it proportional, and by that, and this is again from that article, the Unforgettable article, make sure that the size and scope and weight of that emotional experience, of that hook, that concrete sensory experience, doesn't overshadow what it is you're trying to teach. It needs to be in balance with what it is you're trying to teach. It's possible you can create some amazing, emotional, wonderful, engaging, hook experiences, and then they're just so powerful you really can't even teach what you want to teach. It's got to be appropriate and balanced. And the last thing here is make it relevant. The experience must relate specifically to the, or at least be a springboard naturally into the topic you're trying to teach. We'll look at some examples here. Right now, one of them I want to just remind you about is the one I referenced at the beginning of that article, Mr. Keating in the Dead Poet Society. And I don't know if you've seen that movie. If you've not seen that movie, I want to set that as an example you just got to go see it. It's a great example of teaching methodologies that are amazing, and it's a great movie to begin with. But for a teaching course, this is a movie you got to see. And I'll just remind you briefly about what this particular example is. If you remember, Mr. Keating took the boys out of the room, out of their classroom, and he just kind of slipped by whistling the 1812 Overture, and he brings them into this foyer here, and talks to them about that the poem, "To the Virgins to Make Much of Time." And the whole point of this lesson was to just let those kids know that life is fleeting. It's here today, gone tomorrow, and they shouldn't take that for granted, like most teenagers do. They don't have any sense of mortality. He's trying to put in them a sense of mortality. And so you remember that particular, I hope you do. I hope you've seen it. If not, please go see this movie. You know, it's on Netflix or whatever. But he creates a very, very emotional, visceral, concrete experience as he whispers in a very eerie voice, you know, "Carpe diem, seize the day, boys. Make your lives extraordinary." What an amazing way to create such a powerful motivation to want to study literature of all things. And he does it very well, and I hope, again, you see that as an example. Here's another example in the Creating an Unforgettable Learning Experience. I used the example of teaching Matthew 25, "Unto the least of these, the sheep and the goats, and the ones that were served the poor and that did to the least of these," right? And specifically, we talked about prison ministry in that example. So what was the unforgettable learning experience? What was the hook we did there in that example? Well, we're talking about prison ministry, right? And most of our learners probably don't even know what the inside of a prison looks like. So we create kind of a mini simulation of a prison experience. And so we bring the people into maybe a room in the building that has maybe an old janitor closet or just a bare room with metal chairs, and then we ask the warden of a local prison to come in and to speak to our students as if they are new inmates being enrolled into the system. And we have them put all their belongings in these little bins under their chairs, and we've got these prison uniforms that are stacked in the front, and they're all supposed to go and get one from their size and bring it and set it on their lap. And then you have a policeman who comes in, you know, maybe a friend who comes in their police uniform, and they stand there as if they're guarding the door so these learners don't get out. And then the warden begins to tell them about how their day is going to be and how isolated they're going to be from the rest of the world, and, you know, from the outside, and that this is a place for punishment, not a place of, this is not a club, and this is not a nice place to be. And basically for the next 5 to 10 minutes really helps those learners to feel what it's like to be in a prison. What a great way to start to help people understand the need for prison ministry and to reach out to the least of these. But this is a very concrete experience that then becomes a springboard into talking about what we're doing. And you could have done that, or maybe something a little less, maybe just a simple testimonial, or perhaps a video, or read a story. So it could be anything from something really small to something, maybe even take them to a prison. What a great hook there, so they can actually see and be a part of that. So that's another example. Third example is in the sample lesson that I gave you last week. And in that example, I'll go here, just bring it up real quick. This is that on the lesson plan, you saw here the Daily Mail link to that article. And so here I am looking at it. Homeless man who didn't know he was a millionaire is found dead before he could be told about his fortune. Body of heir to $300 million discovered frozen to death under a railway bridge in Evanston, Wyoming is where that occurred. And so you go and you read this, and you have the students kind of look through this article, and you go, and it's a really interesting article, and it's got history and everything. Very fascinating article. You can spend 5 to 10 minutes talking about this article, and but this is creating a rather I would say visceral experience, because now you're wondering about this guy, and there's emotion in it, and wow, I can't believe this actually happened. And it's just a really fun way to get people motivated and interested in what it is you're talking about. Now, what I want to say is you always want to follow the experience with some reflection. You just don't stop the experience and then boom, jump into the lesson. You want to use a time of reflection. What that means is you want to ask some questions. Remember these learners, these feeler watchers and thinker watchers, they want to contemplate and ponder what they just experienced. They want to reflect on it. So you need to guide the learners into just a little bit of reflection. Tell me what you thought about this, and ask them questions like that. If we go back to the lesson plan here that I gave you last week, you can see here that after we talk about this and we read the highlights, I asked several questions. What kind of life did Mr. Gray live? What kind of life could he have lived? If we could go back in time, what could we have done to change his future from what it was to what it could have been? What one single thing could have made the difference? And so these questions are reflection questions. So after they experience the hook, whatever that activity is, then your job is to help pull out and help them to reflect on it and ask and to answer those questions that may have been stirring inside them. Now, if you do this right, what you're able to do is you're able to allow the actual topic to surface. Okay? Again, I mentioned here, allows the watchers and everyone to ponder and reflect on what they just experienced. And if the questions are properly worded, the main topic of the lesson begins to emerge and to surface naturally. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing because they're the ones who are going to bring the topic up to the surface. They're the ones that are going to think about and go, oh yeah, this is what I saw in that. And then you take that and you say, you know, I'm glad you said that because that's what we're going to talk about today. And it's a beautiful thing to move and to transition from that hook into the rest of the lesson through that time of reflection, of guided reflection. Okay, so that's that next step. So now we move from motivation into examination, and the examination starts with the book. Okay, so we're going to look at depth in the book. So the book here will have, that's of course is for the thinker watcher, and if you remember from what McCarthy tells us, is that it's the analytical learners is what she calls in the format system, is what she calls the thinker watchers. Those are the scientists out there, right? And so they're asking the question, what is this? What's the essence of this thing? Teach this to me. I want to know what it is. And that is how you answer the question. So it's not enough to just to say why you want to learn this. Most of the analytic learners want to learn anyway. They like learning. They love to learn. They're book learners. They love it. So just teach it to them. And so here's some guidelines. Number one, use appropriate activities based on the principles of teaching for each PLO and level of learning. So make sure that you use the right kinds of principles actually activities based on the PLO. So if you want them to know, you're going to make sure to use knowledge activities. If you want them to understand, make sure those understanding activities are based on the principles of understanding. So that's what we talked about earlier, but it's not enough just to throw some random activities in there. They've got to be based on those principles. Number one, we want to use a variety of activities, right? Because we know that they learn best with a variety of activities. And we also want to be sensitive to their modalities. That means we want to make sure that we keep in mind that they are auditory, visual, and kinesthetic learners. So not everyone in this area is going to be able to sit still and listen. Okay, although lecture is a great way for these thinkers to do it, maybe you should support it with visual and listening. So maybe it's a visual lecture that they can see the person, like a TED Talk would be perfect. Is there a way for them to move around and to be bodily moving but also learning the material? There are ways of doing that. And you also want to be sensitive to the multiple intelligence we talked about from Gardner, the verbal linguistic, the logical mathematical spatial. So for instance, if I want to do interpersonal, I would have them learn in groups where they're interacting with one another. If I want them to step back and just to think and reflect, then I might do something like just an intrapersonal reflection where they're by themselves and writing. Okay. Now, the kinds of activities that we might use for the book learning Okay, so for understanding, we know that there's a gain in, if they gain information about that topic, there's a rise in understanding. If they identify terms, if they discover relationships, these are all principles here that are on the sheets that I gave you. For attitude, if I want to have them understand the essence, what it is I'm teaching about attitude, if they need to hear or read or hear about the persons that have the attitude. They need to become aware of and focus attention on the subject. They need to be able to identify and specify that attitude. Those are principles that we would use or in activities that we would use to help with the growth in attitude in this area of the book. So they're getting understanding deeper what that thing is. So here's some examples. In the Unforgettable article, we looked at, again, the sheep and the goats. And one thing that we did is we led the learners through identifying who the sheep and the goats were in that parable. So who are the sheep, who are the goats, who did what. So now they're identifying those actors in that. They're kind of analyzing it. They're finding parallel scriptures to help support the notion of a sheep and a goat and what kind of people those are. Okay, so it's finding relationships. They're reading biblical background about the time. Why was a sheep? Why was a goat an important metaphor in that time? So they're going to the encyclopedias and the biblical background books. They're reading from authorities, maybe those early church fathers talking about this, or maybe about contemporary prison ministry and the need for ministry to the poor and to the prisoner. This is where you really get into the book learning, authorities, encyclopedias, all the traditional kind of learning that you would see in a classroom. That's kind of what we're doing here. Another example here from the sample lesson plan that we did is we were looking at the Bible and the dictionary and the thesaurus. Remember that? And looking at other passages. Let me go back to that real quickly so you can kind of see again how that looks. So here we transition into the book time. And we're saying here, have the students open their Bible. You're going to give them distributed thesaurus and dictionaries, right? So they can look up the definitions for these words: anxious, value, faith, seeking kingdom, seeking righteousness, right? They're going to go maybe look at Bible Hub or Bible Gateway to find those terms. And then you're going to go back and put those terms back into the passage so you can better understand it. You see, you're defining it. You're going to the authorities. You're going to the dictionaries. You're also cross-referencing and looking at this Philippians 4 passage and seeing what it says and how does this interact with what we just learned. So there's this idea of the comparing the relationship between these concepts across different passages. Okay, so this is very much the book learning that happens by the thinker watcher, and they love it. And the learners should then obtain an accurate working knowledge and understanding of the concepts. This is what they need to leave this second quadrant with, is a working knowledge or understanding of the concept. Okay, so and you've taught what this thing is. Okay, next we go on to the look, this third quadrant here, which is also part of the examination, phase of the lesson plan. These are the thinker-doers, or in the format system, it's called the common sense learner. They're the ones that say, it's not just enough for me to know what it is, I need to make sure it works. I need to make sure that it actually is something that's useful here. So the common sense learners, and they're asking the question, how does this work? And the way you answer that question is to let them try it and add a little bit of themselves. If you can let them try it, work it out, practice with it, and add a little bit of themselves to that, then you have answered their question. Remember, these are the engineers out there. These are the people that say, oh, I've learned how to build a bridge, now I need to go out and do it. And I need to make sure it's the kind of bridge that I want to build, and that it looks and works the way that I think it should work based upon how I know bridges should work. Guidelines for the common sense learners, for the thinker-doers. Learners are more active. Now, let me just say something about this model. Over here, the watchers, the feeler watcher, the thinker watcher, the watchers are a little less active because they're more of the pondering, and they're inactive here, and they contemplate what they're doing. They're a little more live in the world of the mind over here. The doers, the feeler-doer and the thinker-doers, are a little more doer. They're active. They want to try and experiment it, get their hands dirty. So when we move from quadrants 1 and 2 over to 3 and 4, the role of the teacher is more active over on the right-hand side and becomes less active on the left-hand side. The role of the student or the learner is a little less active over here, but more active over on the left-hand side because these are the doers, okay? So this is kind of by design. So the learners are more active over here, and the learners get to practice what they've just learned. So they get to now not just sit and think, but now they get to do. They get to go out there and do. And learners get to play with the concepts and add their own ideas. So this is the time where they get to just dig in and start learning deeper. They take a deeper look. So as an example, if you teach a concept of, say, a math concept of how to how to divide, or how to do integrals, or any kind of math concept over here in the quadrant 2, well, in quadrant 3, you're going to give them worksheets and you're going to give them problems that they need to solve. If you're going to teach a concept in chemistry over here, then over here you're going to let them start to practice that and go to the lab and understand, oh, the chain reaction I learned about here, I'm going to make it happen over here. I want to see the chain reaction happen that I learned about over here. I want to actually do it in the lab over here. And that's how you allow them to really work it out and to experience it physically and with active experimentation. And the last thing here is the learners begin to transfer their learning and translate their learning. So they learn it here, they transfer it into new situations, and they begin to translate their new understanding into new ways of thinking, new ways of expressing it. So it's the translation and transfer that begins here, and hopefully they'll take that off in the fourth quadrant out into the world. But they're not ready for that yet. They're just really trying to still work it out in their own thinking here in quadrant 3. Okay, some examples. Well, kinds of activities for understanding. Problem solving is a good thing. So worksheets and problem solving, analyzing case studies, and creating position papers, for instance, of pros and cons and why I would support or not support that idea or that concept. A debate, allowing them to debate and support their positions against other positions. This is a great way for them to work out their ideas, work out their understanding, depending, of course, what the topic is. For attitude, for instance, exploring opportunities to practice that attitude. So they're brainstorming and thinking about ways they could begin to live that attitude out. They plan projects here related to the attitude. And some examples in that unforgettable article. Case studies. We actually gave out case studies to identify in this situation, who are acting as sheep, who are acting as goats, for instance. So that's the way they analyze. They take the understanding of goat and sheep, and then they begin to analyze it in those case studies. So they're transferring this understanding into a new situation, which is that case study. They relate personal experiences about it. So now they're going into their own lives and relating case studies about the sheep and the goats and who is acting like one and who's acting like the other. They evaluate alternate scenarios. So what they're doing is they're taking a scenario and they're saying, well, what if they had acted differently? And now they're applying their concept of a person who acts like righteous or someone who's unrighteous, like a sheep or a goat. And what would they have done if they were a sheep? What would they have done if they were a goat in the situation? And also they, in that particular example in the article, we gave the example of writing a job description of someone who we need people who will minister to prison ministries. So what would that look like, that job description or that one ad? And now that would give you a really great idea as to how they understand the character of someone who is a sheep, who is would minister to the downtrodden or the poor or the widow or in this case the prisoner. And then the sample lesson plan that we gave last week, we had the learners think about the opportunities this week. Remember, they had a journal or a calendar that they could begin to live out the idea of thankfulness and the idea of not worrying and the idea of seeking God and His kingdom. So they were thinking about that, looking at their week and adding that to their agenda. And they were going to plan how and when they would live that out in their lives. So now we move to the last area here, and that's the took. And the took is, again, the takeaway. And this is the application. This is where they apply what they've learned into their lives out there, out of the classroom. So we call it took. The feeler doer is kind of geared toward them, although everyone does all of these, right? But this is where they shine. And we call those the dynamic learners. They're the ones that are just very much not like the analytic learners down here. They're just out there. They need to feel life, and they need to live life. That's how they live and learn. And so their question is, what can this become in my life? What is it that I can do with this learning and make it a reality and make it better and bigger than what I've learned? And your job is to help them take it out of the classroom and begin to live it in their lives. Some guidelines for them: you need to encourage that transference of learning. Encourage them to take this with them and begin to apply it in their lives out there. Okay, so if I'm a math teacher teaching some math skills, how do I take those math skills into my learner's life and take it out there? And so you give examples of how math is so practical out there in the real world, and you give them chance to plan to use that and to do those kind of things. And it can be simple things, and it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter the discipline. There are ways that you can apply learning out there, and you've got to find those connections. Now, of course, in the church, what we do is we help them take that learning out there and apply it to their lives in terms of character, in terms of Christ-likeness, and you encourage that. One way they do this is they create and carry out that plan of action. So the project, the plan of action that they might have created down here as a thinker-doer, now they carry it out over here as the feeler-doer. What can it become? Well, let's go make it happen in my life. Now, a couple things. That project or that plan has to be realistic, meaning something they can accomplish in their, not something that will take them 10 years to accomplish, something that they could do now, something that's realistic for the next week or the next month or the next year. It also needs to be relevant to the concept that we're teaching. So if we're teaching about tithing, for instance, they need to be able to create a project that relates back to this attitude of tithing and of giving, or whatever it is that that topic is. Make time for reports, so when you see them again and when they come back together again, you're able to talk with each other about how it went and how it's going and how are they living that plan out. It gives a sense of accountability, and also the reports that come back can also be really great learning experiences and even hooks for even many lessons that would come, like, wow, this happened to me, and now they're relating this amazing tale of something that happened as a result of them living out their plan, and that now becomes something that interests others to do the same thing. And then one thing to remember when you're talking about particularly those things that are attitude and behavioral related, they have to be voluntary. So those you don't force people to carry out, to become Christ-like, right? To carry out Christian attitudes and values. It has to be something that's voluntary, and if they voluntarily do those things, then it's more likely that those are actually real. Now, when it comes to knowledge and understanding and psychomotor skills, you certainly can you can test for those, and those don't have to be voluntary. But when it comes to attitude change, make sure that those are, that's why we do such things and let them decide what it is they want to do. Okay, so this is going around. Let's take a look at some examples here. So in the Unforgettable article, we suggest upcoming ministry opportunities, 1 or 2 or 3 that they could be a part of, and you give them a sign-up sheet, and they can be and tell them to, maybe give them a little flyer so they know the time and the date, and then you leave it up to them to sign up or to go to those events. Another one was the brainstorming ideas and writing down goals. So you get people together and you start to brainstorm ideas and write down goals of what you want to do here and to take it out into the world as you exhibit those attitudes and values that we see in Matthew 25. We encourage accountability so that those things are followed up and those things actually occur out there from the classroom into the world. The sample lesson plan we gave is a couple things to start the action plan that they came up with. So if we go back to that and we look here at the took, so take your action points that they developed here and the look, and begin to incorporate them in your daily routine. Don't be like poor Mr. Gray, who lived an impoverished life even though he was an heir to fortune. Now, by the way, this took area is a real good place to kind of reference back to your hook. So whatever it is that your hook introduced, the took time is a great way to kind of reintroduce the concept of your hook and then give a sense of closure. I call it bookends. It's like you got a bookend on one side and a bookend on the other. So your hook and your took can actually reference the same thing like bookends. It actually helps to tie things together very neatly. And then the other thing they did, besides taking this routine into your life and acting on it, we also handed out these little tent cards. Remember that? And the tent cards, you say place these tent cards on top on top or near your alarm clock to remind you to give thanks. And the tent cards, remember, they say thank him on it. And so this is a way for them to take this lesson out of the classroom and for them to start doing something with it every day. In this case, when they wake up and they see their alarm clock, they see the little words thank him, and then they thank him each morning before they get up. Okay, so that's a couple of the took things that we did there. That one and using the tent cards to remind them to be thankful each morning. Well, one final word. I want to leave you with a couple of quotes here. In that article that I wrote, The Creating Unforgettable Learning Experience, at the top of that I quoted an author and an educator named Stanford Erickson from his book, The Essence of Good Teaching. And this is the quote: "Students learn what they care about and remember what they understand." What's key to this is that we want students to learn and to remember, right? We want them to learn and to remember. And they will learn if they care about what they're learning about. So if they care and they're motivated, they're going to learn. And if they understand what they're learning, they're going to remember it. So the key to learning and remembering is caring about and understanding. And the caring about is what we do, number one, in the hook. We create the reason for them wanting to learn this thing. And number two, in the second and third quadrants, the look and the book and the look, we help them to understand what they're learning, right? And so they're going to care about and they're going to understand these things if we construct our lessons carefully and appropriately. But that's not all that we're about. As Christian educators, we're about Christ-likeness. That's the took and what they take out of the classroom. And so this quote by Dr. Yount from the Teaching Ministry of the Church, which is another chapter in the book that the Creating Unforgettable Learning Experience chapter that I wrote is in this book, and you'll see this also one of his chapters. The goal of Christian teaching is Christ-likeness in our learners. The teacher helps by provoking clear thinking, passionate valuing, skillful doing, and humble submission to the Lord day by day, right? The provoke clear thinking, the cognitive, passionate valuing, the attitude, the affective, skillful doing, psychomotor, and humble submission. This is the behavioral and the will to the Lord day by day. And this really is the goal for us. We want people to care about, we want them to understand, so that we can ultimately bring them to our goal, right? And his goal, Christ-likeness.